Recently, I've been playing around with the Vanguard Spearhead Space Marine attachment, the one built around the Raven Guard, buffing infantry, specifically the sneaky Phobos-style infantry, and so I was in the market for some more Eliminator Space Marines. I have 3, and I was thinking about getting 3 more, but I couldn't quite bring myself to pull the trigger because I kinda already have a bunch of Space Marines with sniper rifles. I have 10 Space Marine scouts with sniper rifles. Not really a thing anymore. You can bring 1 sniper rifle per squad of 5 scouts, but you can't have full squads with sniper rifles anymore. And so these models have not been getting played with. For that reason, and because they're the old plastic tiny little scouts, and so they just don't feel right in my current Black Templar army. It's kind of 2 different armies. One, an army I put together in high school and college, that's old squatty Space Marines, and the brand new, beautiful, awesome Primaris army. And I don't use the old models very much, but it's a shame because they're painted, they're done. I wanna see if I can kit bash and convert these suckers into a new Primaris unit so I can get them back on the tabletop. And it'll be lore accurate because the Black Templar utilized the scouts differently than other chapters, and we don't follow the Codex Astartes, so we can kind of do whatever we want and get away with it. I painted these scouts to be well camouflaged in the dry desert landscape that my Templar army is set in. They've done good work for me, sniping out orcs in 8th edition, but nowadays, full-size Battle Brothers carry sniper rifles. And I do mean full size. The biggest challenge will be getting these tiny little scouts to be as big as modern Primaris Eliminators. I'm okay with the paint job on these scouts. Back in the day, I wanted to have a stealthy wing of my Black Templar army, full of scouts, landspeeder storms, and scout bikers, but those models ended up getting squatted. But the idea doesn't have to die, just evolve. Eliminators stand on 40mm bases, which is a lot of room for little scouts, but perhaps 2 scouts on a base. I have to get rid of these 25mm bases. Luckily, I used green stuff back in the day, so their little feetsies snapped right off with no fuss. I picked 6 scouts that would fit nicely, and since the old bases are mostly intact, I can reuse these. I'll turn them into some teleport homers for my Terminators. To get these scouts to feel right paired up, I need to offset them a little bit in height, so they can shoot over one another. I started off making a little cliff out of 1/2-inch cork, and I found some epic basing bits to add some more texture. Now that I've got the shape, I need to fill it in some more. I took some kitty litter and sprinkled it around, soaking it in ultra-thin superglue to lock it in place. Now I need to do some smoothing. I mixed up some milliput and pressed it in between the different materials, using my fingers to squish it into the cracks and pressing a wet piece of cork into the soft putty to do some texture. I used some Tamiya basic putty to smooth out the surface of the cork that my minis' feet will stand on, and to add some more fun, I glued down some skulls. Nothing says 40k like random battlefield skulls. I used some wood glue to sprinkle on some fine-grained sand, and now I have to get my model standing, but not permanently. I drilled into my minis' feet and inserted some 1mm brass rods so I can know where they'll stand, but I can keep them separate for painting. With the 2 scouts on there and a little extra height cheated in, they feel a lot more like Eliminators. The biggest difference is the 2 different looking camo cloaks. I want to make the old scouts match, so I put texture paste down on their cloaks and left them to dry with the bases. I've got my little scouts done up in sub-assemblies to make the painting easier, but I don't just want to repaint these guys, because I'm pretty happy with how they look. But it was quite a few years ago I painted these up, and so now I'm a little bit better. And a lot of that betterness comes from just like a higher fidelity that I can paint at. Before I can make the whole guy look good, but now I can make like the pants look good, or the gloves look good, and the faces. The faces need a lot of attention. And I put the texture paste on the capes because I want to make these capes match the Primaris Eliminators so that I can better sell that this isn't a scout squad of snipers, it is a squad of Eliminators that just happen to be scouts. I don't normally start with the bases, but for these guys, I can't resist. I gave my bases a black prime, then I zenithaled with a white ink, doing 50% on the rocks and 100% on the skulls. Now for my Templar's base recipe, and it's super simple. Vallejo earth thinned way down on everything, and then a dry brushing of Pro Acryl Olive Flesh. Usually I would stop there, but I'm feeling a little fancy today, so I gave the skulls a dry brushing of white. I used some contrast brown to work in some shadows, and then I used some white to do some scratchy highlights, and I painted the base of the rims with a glossy black paint. New bases are a great way to modernize a mini, and I can't wait to get my old scouts onto these new bases, but there's plenty of stuff I still need to touch up. On those camo cloaks, I have to replicate the paint job for my Eliminators, and I painted those minis before I started writing down my recipes, so I'll have to do some experimenting. I started off with a base coat of an earthy brown and then a dry brushing of a cream color, the same color I used on the bases. Then a wash of thinned down wildwood to darken it and shade the recesses. Once that was dry, I dry brushed a mix of my earth brown and tan, which brightened it up, but it still didn't quite look like the Eliminators cloaks. I applied more wildwood to the bottom of the cloaks to make them look dirty, and I did more dry brushing of tan. I'm sure this is the right color, but it doesn't quite look the same. After giving it a think, I cracked the code. I didn't dry brush the Eliminator cloaks, I sponged them. This does a similar job of highlighting the texture, but it leaves a different look than the dry brushing. Now that I'm touching up these old Marines, one thing I really like about these new Eradicators is that they've got the camo going on, but then they've got this cold gray peeking out with their armor and guns. Where my old Scouts, they're kind of just brown all over, and so there's not a strong focal point to the mini, so I want to see if I can work that in on a second try. I took my Black Templar mix, which is Contrast Black Templar, Leviathan Blue, and Lamian Medium. I put this on the inside of their cloaks to make their clothes pop more, and then I dry brushed white over the guns in preparation for some more contrast paint. Rattling Grime. This is one of my favorite colors. It's a dark black with some brown in it, and it looks really good on guns. After the wash, I dry brushed some silver over the rifles, and this gave their guns a really different look than the rest of the earth tones all over the minis. Now, one failing on my old Space Marine Scouts is that back in the day, I was not good at washes, especially washes on light colored things. On their cream colored clothing, I clearly base coated it and then put on the wash and then highlighted it, but that basically meant just re-base coating it every single place where the wash didn't pool the darkest. And so I wanna try again and see if I can get that clothing looking a little bit better. I thinned down some contrast wildwood and then quickly put this over the cream clothing and came back with a damp brush and wiped it off the most raised areas so there was a nice gradient over them. I came back in with the tan color. This is an in-between the dark wildwood and the light tan, and I glazed this over the clothing. Then I did some scratchy highlights of cream to make the brightest spots of these clothes. I also gave the gloves some attention, putting highlights on the knuckles to give the hands a little bit more shape. Comparing this to my old paint job, the new one has a lot more look at in these spots than the old ones. It's always what they were meant to look like, but the new ones look like they're more in focus. I sponged some silver over the tan armor to make them look battle-weary like my modern Primaris Marines. And on the tubes of the rifles, before they were just black. Now I want to do some real painting on these. I started off with a blue-black color and mixed a little bit of white into this to brighten it and make some highlights where the tubes feed into the guns. Then I took a brush with a decent tip and painted a lot of small vertical lines, like these are metal hoses feeding into the guns. Why do Space Marine guns need to be fed fuel? Who's to say? I used these same colors on their visors. The brown before made sense for sneaky operatives, but having more contrast between the pinks, browns, and tans of their faces and armor and the cold metal makes these details stand out a lot more. After a black wash, these goggles were looking more defined. And speaking of defined, it's time to put on an accent color. Before, the Scouts had red lenses, because my Templars have red accents, but for the Eliminators, I used neon green. This is something unique to my Phobos units, and I want to keep it going on these Scouts. I base coated every lens with green, then put a highlight of warm white in the middle, and then a glazing of a bright saturated green contrast paint. The green pops way more than the old red did. And you know what else pops with a coat of green? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like our new Nick and J dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly train pack or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of January, we made The Fall, Part 2, Guns. Big Guns. This set focuses on printable high-caliber ordnance ready to rock a battlefield. This set features the enormous battle cannon, a building-sized gun encased in a Gothic shrine for sending 100-pound shells into orbit. The sun cannon, an energy turret for throwing hot balls of glowing energy across the landscape, and the humble field artillery for mopping up whatever's left. This set perfectly complements the fall buildings and is the second of 3 sets focused on getting a proper 40k board up and running as easily as possible. Now, I've been doing the math hammer on Space Marine Eliminators because they're a very interesting unit to me, because they're a good unit, but they're not that good that I think anybody looks at the datasheet and gives them a second glance. But I think they really do come into their own in the Vanguard Spearhead Detachment. Eliminators are essentially 3 little sniper dudes that have 36-inch range melta-guns. Strength 9, not that good. D6 damage, kinda good. And I think you pair that with Guerrilla Tactics, a stratagem from the Vanguard Spearhead Detachment, they get a lot more interesting. Guerrilla Tactics lets you pick up a model at the end of your opponent's turn and place it back on the field at the end of your movement phase. And if they're Phobos units with the snipers R, you get to do that twice. So I could do it with 2 different squads of snipers, and I could use Oath of Moment to give myself rerolls, and I could attach lieutenants to give myself lethal hits and move, shoot, move. Now, Eliminators already have move, shoot, move in their profile, but they have to give up one of their sniper rifles for the benefit. If I attach a lieutenant to give them move, shoot, move, all of a sudden I can be zipping them on and off the board, scooting them around after they've shot to keep them safe in my opponent's turn, and I think they could crack some armor, and my opponent would never see it coming. That's my hypothesis right now. I want to see how it plays on the tabletop, and I don't think I can go that wrong with this idea, because even if they don't manage to kill any armor, they would make the perfect action monkeys for doing secondary missions. So I've got 1 squad, and now I am very close to having a second squad. I just gotta clean up these faces a little bit. Faces are something that takes a lot of practice. The old faces were 2 colors, a dark and a light. I can do a little bit better now. I started off glazing a dark pink over their brows, cheeks, and chins. Then I mixed some tan paint into these colors and made much smaller highlights around the cheekbones, the nose, nostrils, and brows. I finished them off picking out the eyes. This took quite a few tries. They have old, poorly defined eyeballs, but after some trial and error, I got something good enough. And most of these figures have their faces glued to their rifle scopes anyway. It's just a couple of them that are shouting orders. Now I can stick these suckers onto their bases. This morning I had 2 squads of Legends Sniper Scouts, but now I have the world's most unique Primaris Eliminators. It's pretty funky to have 2 models on the same base. It feels a little bit more like a diorama than a miniature, but it does take up pretty much the same exact amount of volume as a modern Primaris Eliminator. And I'm not gonna have it be the Scout Squad and the Primaris Squad. I'm gonna mix and match them because it makes more sense in the lore. Where all other Space Marine chapters keep their scouts separated in the 10th Company from the regular Space Marines, Black Templar take those neophytes and they just give them to a random Space Marine to be trained in the middle of battle. And so it makes perfect sense for a Primaris Eradicator to have a couple of scouts palling around with them. Everybody's gotta learn how to use a sniper rifle. Also, I just really like recycling my old models because I was probably never gonna go and use the legend rules for scouts with sniper rifles, but I am gonna take 2 squads of eliminators. My old school squaddy models are coming to game night again. I could have just left these models to gather dust on my shelf while I bought more Primaris Eliminators, but that would have just meant that my army would look like any other Space Marine army. These weird scouts on the little bases, they add a lovely texture that makes my army unique. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of my Double Scout Eliminators? I like them, and it's got me really excited to try to recycle some of my other old school squaddy Space Marines into a more modern 40k kits.